Hello, beautiful world. That is Cody.
And that's Kyle, and we're the Brothers Blue. And today we're going to talk about a couple of things: the Electoral College, the filibuster, and gerrymandering. Whether or not we get into how those things affect race relations in America is something to be seen. But specifically, we're going to kind of talk about their constitutionality and things like that. So, starting with the Electoral College, one of the fun things that I did to start out with some research was just the simple numbers. So, we previously narrowed it down to the fact that unequal representation is exactly what's happening with the Electoral College. And even though you have DC representing a large portion of African American metropolitan citizens, for every uh, electoral vote that we give DC, there are votes given to Montana, South Dakota, North Dakota, Wyoming, Idaho, etc. And one of the things that I wanted to look up specifically was the populations of these places. So I actually took those five states: Montana, South Dakota, North Dakota, Wyoming, and Idaho, added up their populations to get less than 5 million people. The state of California has 39 million people. So the disproportionate effect of the Electoral College, just from that perspective alone, is pretty glaringly obvious. You're on mute.
Sorry, I was yelling at my dog. So the counter argument that I was making earlier was that Washington D.C. has essentially the same population as the state of Montana, but they also have the same electoral power when it comes to the electoral college, and that shows how like just disproportionate it is because you have one population that's extremely rural having the same voting power as an urban population of the same size. So it just doesn't make sense. It's archaic. Um, can I share my screen for a second?
Yeah, real quick. And it's not race baiting to say the actual facts of the matter, because when we're talking about Montana, South Dakota, and Wyoming, places like that, the simple fact of the matter is they are white populations. And
Yeah.
Washington, D.C. is a largely African American population.
Well, it's pretty multicultural, but yeah, yeah.
It's very heavily African American.
Yeah, you're probably right there. So I just wanted to make a point. That's why I was going to share my screen just real quick because on the point that I was talking about. Um,
Is it in the Constitution?
yeah, it's directly in it.
Okay.
Um,
So, real
so
quick, what I'll say is Kyle has a PDF version of the Constitution, which is nice because he can just pull it up on his computer at any time. So,
yeah,
that's what's cool. I have this book called We the People. It was gifted to me from a fantastic cousin, and it has the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the Northwest Ordinance, the Federalist Papers, and many other American founding documents. So every modern American could do themselves a favor by owning this book. Again, it's called We the People.
yeah, exactly. So basically, if you want to know anything about your government or everything about your government, pick up that book. Um, so this is the Constitution. It's 85 pages long. Um, so yeah, and that's actually what I was trying to look up a minute ago, and I couldn't find. So maybe I can find it here while we're doing this. But the thing I wanted to point out immediately, I think it was on page 12 here. So let's go there. Yeah. So basically, here we have Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution. And it's basically how the Electoral College is laid out, how we elect the president. Um, And this is one of the original articles of the Constitution. So, just to give you an idea of how old this piece of legislation really is, um, in the beginning, right here, it's like, yeah, the president and vice president will be elected. And then you have basically a page, all of this, and then all of this, all the way down to section 2. And section 2 of this article of the Constitution is basically concerning how the president fills his cabinet and things like that. But this first section of Article 2 is just absurdly long, overly complicated, and just filled with language that has nothing to do with our modern society. So, like, that's what I wanted to look up was the specific amendment that says, hey, when the Constitution isn't working, the people have the right to change it. Um, I I believe that's like the I think it. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it's one of the amendments or in the articles of the Constitution. I really don't know, but I'll have to look that up and find it.
Wait, what are you talking about? Which part? What are you looking for?
There's a part of the Constitution that says when the Constitution isn't working, that the people have the right to change it.
Right, absolutely. And I think that's where the Constitutional Congress is talked about.
Well, it's also about yeah, ratification of amendments has to go through. So that's the whole thing.
Yeah. And I think that would happen after a Constitutional Congress. Again, maybe not. Maybe we're talking about different things.
Yeah.
But before we move on from the Electoral College, I did want to say a couple of things actually. And it's, again, based off Constitution. So, like, you can't really argue that the Electoral College is unconstitutional. It almost by definition is constitutional. It's
Yeah.
literally written into it, it's part of it.
Yeah, it's
So,
just not a good part.
right, exactly. And so that's kind of where this pro number one is kind of going towards. So the founding fathers enshrined the Electoral College in the US Constitution because they thought it was the best method to choose the president. They also thought that this form of government would last maybe 30 years. We're 200 plus years into this American experiment, and the Electoral College is an antiquated piece of the Constitution that is riddled with old language and continues to give disproportionate power to rural white America. Pro number two from, again, this website is Britannica. So it's like, I actually believe what they say right here, reliable, nonpartisan, and empowering.
Well,
Because,
it's also got the pros and the cons.
right, exactly. It's literally a pro and con article. So there's not really like any liberal bent to this at all. So, anyways, pro number two, the Electoral College ensures that all parts of the country are involved in selecting the president of the United States. And I'll actually, my argument is kind of is summed up in con number two right here, is that something you've said previously is how the Electoral College makes it to where really only 10 or 12 states decide our presidential election,
Yeah.
and 30 plus states don't really matter when it comes to the presidential election. And
Yeah.
I'd even argue that it really comes down to like maybe even less than like maybe 5 or so swing states, because the amount of electoral votes that you get out of California and Texas are crazy, but they're almost always reliably for one party. So they definitely choose who our president is in comparison to places like New Hampshire and South Dakota.
Yeah. Hey, can I pause the recording real quick?
Sure.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, everyone. My partner in crime was friendly enough to let me know that my lighting was a bit off. So we no longer get the Space as Cool as F book or the Kobe Bryant book in the background, but that's okay. So moving on in the conversation, Going on to pro number 3 of the Electoral College listed here, it says the Electoral College guarantees certainty to the outcome of the presidential election. And then it says blah, 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 different stuff. And then at the end, it says in 227 years, the winner of the popular vote has lost the electoral vote only 5 times. This proves the system is working. And instead of that, I would argue exactly. I would argue that it proves that we don't need the electoral college. If the popular vote works that frequently, then we don't need the electoral college. And it talks about Nixon and Clinton being the two main guys who I guess benefited from the electoral college being in place because they didn't get a majority vote. But seriously, it's so few and far and in between. I really liked your reaction when you heard me read that sentence.
Yeah. So what's funny is people think that the popular vote means like the popularity vote, but it's actually population. Like that's what
Well,
it is.
yeah, no, you're right. You're
It's
right,
the most
actually.
representative. It's called direct democracy,
Right.
and it's a thing.
Right, and I don't disagree with what you're saying because yeah, you don't disagree with like logic and facts. But what I will say is that the American presidential election is absolutely a popularity contest, hence Donald Trump.
Well,
Um,
yeah,
and finally, on the Electoral College, my last note was that people who like democracy, like that's the thing, is like if you don't like democracy, then you can just admit that, and that can be part of who you are.
yeah.
But I like democracy, and democracy means the popular vote. And
Well,
like you said, that means the majority of the population is choosing who is being elected into office.
yeah. And so basically, I don't really understand how you have a constitutional republic without democracy. So, like, is it authoritarian? Do you have an authoritarian republic, at which point it's not really a republic? Um,
Yeah,
I'm curious about people who do want to remove democracy from our republic. It's sort of how our republic functions, like through democratic institutions.
absolutely. It's really funny because when people are like, well, we don't live in a democracy, we live in a republic, it's like, yes, you're right. That is technically true. But like you just said, it's democratic institutions and specifically elected representation of the people, I think, is the idea behind our republic, which
Yeah,
sounds a lot like democracy.
yeah.
All right.
So yeah, we're not going to go over the pro or the cons in this article because we basically can do that ourselves on our own time.
Right.
Was that all you wanted to say about the Electoral College?
Yes.
Okay. So, yeah, before we transition to our next topic, I was able to find that part of the Constitution that I was talking about, and I just wanted to show it to you before we move on, so we can have a proper compare and contrast on these two specific articles of the Constitution. So, what we have here is, sorry. So, back here on the PDF of the Constitution, Article 5. So, this is a little bit further down in your Constitution, a couple pages later, still in the original document. So, this is pretty old stuff here, but like this is where it contrasts. It's like, well, this kind of makes sense. And I'm going to read it to show you how much sense it makes and how short it is compared to the other thing, which would have taken me 12 minutes to get through.
Right.
The Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to this Constitution, or on the application of the legislature of 2/3 of the several states, shall call a convention for proposing amendments, which, in either case, shall be valid to all intents and purposes as part of this Constitution, when ratified by the legislators of 3/4 of the several states, or by conventions in three-fourths thereof, as one or the other mode of ratifications may be proposed by the Congress, provided that no amendment which may be made prior to the year 1808 shall in any manner affect the first and fourth clauses in the ninth section of the first article, and that no state, without its consent, shall be deprived of its equal suffrage in the Senate. So we don't have equal suffrage in the Senate right now because of the House of Representatives. So that's an interesting thought that I literally just came up with, like because that's an actual form of government that is currently in violation of the Constitution.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that. That's crazy. We're gonna have to flesh that idea out off camera.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy. So that's what I'm saying is like that's Article 5, and that's basically like all you need to say, hey, Article 2, Section 1 should be rewritten and redone. And
Right.
the fact that what like these stipulations haven't been met for that to happen just shows you how much power the people invested in the Electoral College have.
Right. And so I think what this is also showing is two specific ways that it can happen. And I think that's what you said. And I think the last constitutional amendment we had was in the 60s or something like that. I don't know what it was, to be honest with you. You might. But that I think was accomplished through one means, which is going through the House and then going through the Senate, and then they, pass a constitutional amendment. But what this also talks about is the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of several states shall call a convention for proposing amendments. That's the constitutional Congress that we have talked about. And it's a concept that has interesting, I guess I would say, kind of fanfare, because some states have already signed on to wanting to do a constitutional Congress, and it would need to be, what's it say on here?
I think
Two
three-fourths.
thirds, two thirds, right? So it's not quite to the 2/3 threshold that is required to hold a constitutional Congress by the states. Um, but what's interesting is that both red states and blue states have signed on to this, with obviously different motives for what would take place in amending the Constitution. So it's
Yeah.
very.
Well, basically, you'd have all these states coming to the table. Like, can you, like, that's what's so different is like when they struck down the Articles of Confederation and came up with this, there was a delegate from Virginia. His name was Thomas Jefferson. There was a delegate from Maryland. There was a delegate from South Carolina, a delegate from North Carolina, a delegate from Georgia.
Yeah.
If this were to happen, two-thirds or whatever number it was would have to make it happen, and then I'm pretty sure all 50 states would have the right to send their delegates to this
Yes.
Congress.
Yes, they would.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. It wouldn't just be exclusionary or inclusive. I guess it wouldn't just be inclusive of the states who voted for it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Do you want to move on from the Electoral College?
Yeah.
Do you want to start talking about the filibuster?
I thought we were doing gerrymandering next.
I mean, I thought the opposite, but I don't care.
Okay, well, we can talk about the filibuster. And yeah, I'll start real quick. So, yeah, what we have here, hold on. Let me share my screen again. Hold on.
Yeah, I stopped, right? Okay, good.
Yeah, let me share again. Okay, so we're going to look at the definition of filibuster here.
Ah.
If this will work. So, and I like that, like, we can talk about this Wikipedia long version, but I like this simple one here. So, filibuster, an action such as a prolonged speech that obstructs progress in a legislative assembly while not technically contravening the required procedures. So, yeah, basically, it's like the definition of political gridlock.
Yeah. It's that's the argument. The filibuster is supposed to create bipartisanship. I think that is a weak argument.
It's like a traffic jam. It's like, why the hell is this happening? Don't know. It's not illegal.
Yeah. Um, okay. Is that it? I mean, did you want to talk more about the definition? Because yeah.
No. Well, I wanted to talk about I guess, the practicality of it because I was just watching that stuff about LBJ, and since the world should know I'm a history teacher, and I'm literally doing a lesson on LBJ on Monday, so I'm excited to do that, but Southern Democrats during the party switch, which was a real thing, and we should probably talk about that at some point. Like, yeah. So, but the short version for right now is basically you had Southern Democrats that were sticking onto conservative ideologies that basically trace their way back all the way to Andrew Jackson. We're basically talking about Jacksonian conservative Democrats in the 20th century. But these are the people who filibustered the Civil Rights Amendment that LBJ was trying to pass. And LBJ was the prime example of a Southern Democrat who switched. He was like, yeah, I'm a Southern Democrat, but I'm an FDR style Democrat. Social reform, healthcare reform, education reform, all that. Like he wanted it, but he was a Democrat from Texas. So he basically was facing these conservative Democrats in Congress, and they were filibustering for like 80 days, I think. And this is what I wanted to talk about to stop a filibuster. If this will, God, I hate this sometimes. Stupid computer. Okay, so to stop a filibuster, you have the process of cloture. The cloture rule is the only formal procedure that Senate rules provide for breaking a filibuster. Basically, you get enough votes, and I'm not sure if they were fighting against a filibuster for the 13th Amendment, but it was basically the same thing. Like, you're running around Congress, the halls of Congress, trying to get people to vote, switch sides, vote on an amendment or an act, and that's what you have. So, like, you have the filibuster and you have cloture, which is your only legal recourse in the Senate when the filibuster is brought up.
Okay. And I'm sorry, but can you pause it for a second?
Yeah, absolutely. Uh, uh, Sorry, I had to do that.
No, that's fine. All right. Welcome back, everybody. Thank you for the short break. Continuing our conversation about the Senate. So, or not the Senate, the filibuster. Sorry. In my opinion, it's just a tool that's used by the Senate, and it's used back and forth between Republicans, Democrats. They both use it, whatever. That's why it's so hard to get rid of, because each party, when they're in power, use it to their advantage. And I can show you why here in a second. But specifically, a reason why the filibuster is inherently racist is because a state like California with 40 million people and probably a strong percentage of ethnic, racial populations, African American, Hispanic, Asian Americans, all of those being represented in California. Again, we have Montana, South Dakota, North Dakota, Wyoming, and Idaho. So that's 5 states. So that's 10 senators. 10 senators representing 5 million white people and 2 senators representing 40 million multi ethnic people.
Yeah.
So, I mean, again, if you want to argue with numbers, then that's fine, but I don't like to do that type of stuff. And then the last thing that I'll say about the Constitution, or not the Constitution, is a filibuster, is that it's not in the Constitution.
Yeah.
So literally fits the definition of unconstitutional. That's my opinion on the definition of constitutional and unconstitutional. Unconstitutional is whether or not it's actually in the document.
Yeah. That's a pretty good standard. Um, so I guess I am just actually curious. Did you look up the history of it?
Yeah, so it began in 1806, or it was first introduced in the Senate in 1806. And so that this is Wikipedia. Again, if you want to argue with a literal online encyclopedia, then go ahead. Um, but the
How
reason
can they lie about this? Like,
right, exactly. It's yeah, it's literally just factual reporting on a lot of stuff, which is the paragraph that I have highlighted. And I was excited that you brought up in LBJ's administration there being this maybe historically long 80-day filibuster. And I'm not like a fan of Nancy Pelosi or anything like that. But it's not in my highlighted part, but it's down here. So she set a record for the longest speech on the House floor, speaking for 8 hours and 7 minutes in support of DACA. She took advantage of the fact that the minority leader is allowed to speak indefinitely without interruption. And if that is not a boss move, then I don't really know what is. That's Nancy Pelosi pulling out her metaphorical nuts and just wiping them all over the House floor.
yeah. Wow. Dude, I don't know if I could do anything for 8 straight hours. I
Yeah.
can barely sleep for 8 straight hours.
Well done, sir. I like it. And
Dude,
so
that's
the
intense. That's
yeah,
really intense.
yeah, it absolutely is. And so the thing I have highlighted here is something I wanted to show because it shows exactly the point that I was making earlier in that Democrats use it when they're in power and Republicans use it when they're in power. And so in 2013, the Democratic controlled Senate exercised the nuclear option. And then it literally says a couple of lines later in 2017, the Republican controlled Senate did the same with literally the exact same vote count. And it just proves how, like, when we talk about the filibuster being a tool to create bipartisanship, it's not doing that. It's just creating gridlock, and it's not working.
Yeah. It doesn't create bipartisanship. It only creates gridlock.
It just doesn't work.
So, oh, dude,
Oh, sorry.
there was a paragraph at the top that I was just like looking at, and it was talking about cloture. And yeah, right there at the top.
Knocking a bill to death. Yeah.
Well, no, I was at the very first sentence is kind of what I was wondering is like, how does this exist like in its like logistically? I want to know. So the standing rules of the
Yeah.
what is that? Can you click on that?
The standing rules of the Senate.
Yeah. There we go. Oh, wow. Okay.
Parliamentary procedures.
There are currently 44 rules.
Oh,
Earmarks. Oh, yeah, dude. That's another one. Do you know what earmarks are?
let's talk about that one off camera.
Okay. Well, no, just like yes or no. Just I want to know if you know.
Not really.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Isn't it called something else? Isn't it called like pig fat or something like that in like omnibus bills or something? Yeah,
I
that's
think
what I'd rather talk about this one off camera.
okay, that's fine. Yeah. But and that's really like filibuster. Of course, it's in the standing rules of the Senate, the same place where freaking earmarks exist. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Do you want to talk about gerrymandering?
Yeah, I guess I can start, but like, so it made me basically think of two comparisons. And the first one is pretty obvious with redlining. So obviously, in starting like I don't know, maybe like in the New Deal. Like this was way back. Basically, when the FHA was created, the Federal Housing Authority, they
Yep.
started drawing up districts
Yep.
in urban zones to designate loan like patterns and giveaways, like how they were going to give out loans, basically. Uh, so the FHA was in charge of this, and it was one of the many administrations put out by the New Deal that was absolutely discriminatory. So basically, they drew up all these housing districts in all these cities across the country, and essentially offered nice low interest loans in what were drawn up as white neighborhoods, and they would literally like section off like black, like minority neighborhoods, whether it was black or like Chinese Americans or whatever. But this obviously was really, really prevalent in Chicago. That's where it really has had long term effects. And you can see the way populations are distributed in that city. So yeah, that's basically like gerrymandering with a specific thing like housing. So I also wanted to talk about gerrymandering, or like I guess the redistricting of school districts, because that's another one where it's like, oh, you can basically just cut off this area here, and now this whole neighborhood is part of a school district that has lower property values.
I think school funding is something we should absolutely talk about in a completely separate video because of how in depth we should go.
Yeah,
Because
exactly. So the basic point I'm making here is that, like, if, for anybody that doesn't know, is that school districts are basically funded by property taxes. So if you have a district full of houses that have low property value, the school district is going to be underfunded.
exactly. So
We'll go into that in depth later. Yeah, obviously.
thank you.
Yeah.
Um,
So I wanted to compare those two things to gerrymandering,
oh yeah,
because
totally.
they're specific sectors
Yep.
of
That's
America.
that's real estate and education.
Yeah, specific sectors of legislative policy that have been subject to the same sort of redistricting that takes place with gerrymandering.
And I'll argue that specifically it's two of the things that can best enable upward mobility is
Yeah,
home ownership and education.
yeah, literally shelter and education. Like I'm so so socially democratic that I think like shelter,
Housing.
education, food.
How,
I ultimately think food should be provided, like all of it, healthcare. But yeah, that's also another conversation.
exactly, because I talked about in a discussion response for my class that I'm taking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs
Yeah,
and specifically nutrition and sleep being on the first level.
yeah,
And if we're dealing with kids who are hungry and sleepy, then we're behind the eight ball.
yeah,
So, way off topic, not off topic, I'm sorry, because I wanted to talk about gerrymandering a little bit more from like the political viewpoint. And we are talking about markets, I feel like almost like as bad as it is to say that education's a market, it's like a realist. Yeah. So
Those are smart. They're what I said. They're legislative sectors.
okay. Yeah.
I mean, really, they should. And then what I said is they should be public sectors, the way I see it. That's why I just don't like the yeah the use of the word market. There's a little off. Yeah,
Yeah. My bad.
that's all
Uh,
right.
right. So I actually didn't have anything pulled up on gerrymandering specifically, but I know you did. If you want to talk about those maps, but I do have a couple of notes, and so the thing about it is it similar to the filibuster in that it's not in the Constitution. So, like
Yeah,
gerrymandering, literally is unconstitutional, and it's actually harder to argue that this one is unconstitutional because uh, districts have to be drawn up somehow, right? Um, and in my opinion, something that should happen is Congress members get paid handsome amounts of money to think about problems like this. And so Congress should figure out an amendment for districting. Uh,
yeah,
yeah. So codify it into the Constitution in a way that it can't be taken advantage of the way it is by both parties. And so that's what I also wrote down is like, because both parties take advantage of gerrymandering in their own ways, it will never go away.
yeah. Once again, that's like the filibuster. It's like
And it's also like term limits for Congress members.
yeah.
Do you think Bernie Sanders wants to do anything but be a congressman?
Well, I mean, he's one of the most effective Congress. Yeah, I'm not going to let you Bernie bash for a second. He's like one of the most effective congressmen, Congress people of the later 20th, of the second half of the 20th century
I agree.
and the beginning of the 21st century. So yeah, he's yeah. I don't know. I was watching that LBJ thing earlier, and it's like, dude, he was a master politician. Like that's for sure.
That's cool.
Got a
So,
lot done.
um, actually something that you mentioned before you bring up maybe your gerrymandering maps is that did you know that to this day Chicago is literally like the most blatant example of how bad gerrymandering is?
That's ridiculous because what I was talking about earlier, it's also literally like almost I don't know if you could prove it like numerically, but like it is one of the has experienced the most of the long lasting effects of redlining. Like I was saying earlier, like Chicago, everybody knows about redlining and everybody knows that it was the worst in Chicago. Like it really was. And you're telling me that gerrymandering is also like extremely prevalent there. So it's like, yeah.
So I'm gonna just share it real quick and then you can share what you have.
Well, I just had the definition, but we could also look at some maps.
Yeah, so this
Oh,
map right here, yeah, it's called the sliver or the slice, or it's called different things.
whoa, that is crazy.
Right. Like, how does this make any sense at all? And not
Wow.
only that, but like parts like this and parts like this, it's like, what is this, a cul-de-sac in the hood? So it's part of the white? Right.
Yeah. So this is Chicago?
Yeah, and this is inner city Chicago throughout here. Right.
And then it's like north side and south side. Yeah.
Yep.
Wow. Yeah, you could bring up the redlining map and see similar distributions.
Yeah. Cool, Chicago.
Yeah, cool, Chicago. So I guess the only thing I had, and those maps are better than what I had. All I have,
No, I liked what you had.
I don't. There we go. Okay, so yeah, the definition. Uh, that was weird. Manipulate the boundaries of an electoral constituency so as to favor one party or class. That's interesting. Class. So yeah, this is the map that you were talking about, or we were gonna look at.
So, as you're pulling that up, something I wanted to say is that I did a little bit of research into gerrymandering prior to this, and there are two, I guess, what would be called key principles for how gerrymandering works, and it's packing and cracking. So,
Yes. Yeah.
packing is where, you know, all of these people are in a concentrated area, and because of that they're not being represented because they're the people in the outlying areas are being overrepresented. And then the other one is cracking, where you separate the minority populations, and they are so small in their various areas that they don't end up having representation.
That's this one right here. So what was the second one you said?
Well, I said two. It's only two. It's packing and cracking.
That's why I said second. Well,
Second one was cracking.
so this is cracking,
Yes.
where you basically break up these minority neighborhoods
Yep.
so that they become underrepresented.
Exactly. So like this T shape at the top has six, I guess it's red, and then four blue, right?
Yeah.
So it loses. And
Yeah.
then this one, it's even worse. Or no, it's the same. It's six red and four blue. Yeah.
And the same.
Yeah, exactly. So either way, that's the thing, is it's used by both parties at different times for their convenience, just like the filibuster.
And that's
And
why this is really good, because even though you can sit there and say that, oh, this is obviously bent for Democrats because they're blue, it's like, dude, don't think like that. Just think that this could be either party.
exactly, because it is.
Exactly. Both sides use this.
All right. Cool. You ready to call it?
Yeah, I think so. That was everything. Oh, yeah. So next time we're going to talk about the Second Amendment and all that. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's especially interesting because of several reasons. We'll leave it at that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess we're both gun owners, so that's bound to come up.
Right.
Yeah. All right.
How could we ever be gun owners? We're Democrats.
I freaking love guns.
I love guns.
Yeah. All right. So why don't you send us off?
All right, everybody. Remember, knowledge is power.